Good day, everyone. Today, we will be discussing a story and our introduction on Lit 1, Philippine Literature in English. Now, our course is a course that explores works of Filipinos written in English. These works are organized to help promote culture, society, values, identity, and history. The Philippines. This is a country with rich and unique cultural identity illustrated in its literature. Philippine literature in English. So why do we have works of literature from our country written in English? The first reason is influence. If you remember in your history, the Philippines has been colonized by the Americans, thus prompting the people to use the language as the medium of communication. And the other reason is globalization. Some writers to this day use the language to reach a wider audience and not just target a specific group of people. So those are the top two reasons why we have works of literature written in English. At the end of this chapter, the students are expected to identify the elements of a Philippine short story to understand cultural elements and values embedded in the story, and to portray the Filipino cultural elements and/or values exemplified in the literary work read. Our specific subject matter is dealing with spiritual skepticism resulting from traumatic events in life. There are 6 elements of a short story. We have the character, the setting, the conflict, the point of view, the plot, and the theme. The character answers the question who, the setting answers the question where and when, the conflict answers what's the problem or the issue, the point of view answers the question who is telling the story, the plot answers the question what happened, and the theme answers the question what is it about? What is the story about? Character or characters. A character is the who of the story. The characters in stories are the protagonists or the main character, so these are usually the good people or the good guys, and the antagonists, the one who triggers conflict or who makes conflict for the protagonist. We also have others who are considered as the supporting actors or the supporting characters, and these are the people in movies and in stories that are just at the sidelines. They help give color to the story. One can evaluate a character based on what he says and does and what the other characters say about him or her. The setting in short stories has 2 types. We have the physical, which is where the story takes place, and the chronological setting. This is when it happened. So it could be a generalized thing, like during the daytime, or a specific day, or even a specific time. Conflict literally means a battle, a struggle or force that gives rise to a dramatic action. In fiction, there are 2 types of conflict. These are internal, which means it is a conflict or a psychological struggle within the mind of a character, and external conflict, which is either a man against another man or a man against the environment. The point of view, or POV, refers to how the story is told, or the narrative, or who is telling the story. So there are 3 types. We have the first person protagonist, the first person observer, and the third person point of view. The first person protagonist POV has the main character as a narrator. Now look at this photo, for example, and look at the caption. The caption says, "I went to the ocean the other day just to find peace." Now the first person protagonist POV shows you the I. It's more or less you are the character. You are living the life of the character. You are seeing and feeling how the character feels and experiencing everything as the character. The second one is the first person observer. It refers to a secondary character as the narrator of the story. Now look at the caption. She was always beautiful, especially when she speaks. Now, in this photo, we have another person observing the she, the woman, the main character, the protagonist. So this character belongs to the story, is still part of the plot, it's still part of the, you know, the world that the author built. But this author or narrator during the time is just a side character observing the protagonist and telling the story from his or her point of view. Finally, the most common one is the third person POV. This is known as the invisible author telling the story. The third person POV knows everything, including thoughts of the characters, and he is referred to as a third person omniscient character. Now look at this caption. Despite the dangerous gap, the two of them reached out to shake each other's hand. Now, if you look at this, you would now understand and know that we are talking about somebody who is narrating the story from outside of the plot, from outside of what's going on in this world built by the author. So there you have it, the three different types of POV. Now we have the plot of the story. This refers to the sequence of events. It shows us how the story develops or moves from one event to another. Now on the right side, you see this blank space here. There will be a diagram, so just be very attentive to that one. The first one is exposition. The exposition usually begins the story introducing the characters, setting, and main conflict. The next one is the rising action. Now, the rising action presents the main character facing a crisis, the events of which lead to facing a conflict. The conflict complicates the story. Now, I want you to remember that the rising action doesn't really have to be very obvious, but you can sense that there will be a distress or a change in emotion. The climax is the highest point of the story. It arises when the main character enters a major event where he faces a major enemy. Now, this enemy can either be internal, himself, overthinking, anxiety, etc., or external. Or it can even be simply just a challenge if a person's tire or a car breaks down in front of him. And that's the struggle there. It's a very simple story. This is where the story is most in action, drama, or excitement. So you can really sense the heightened emotions here. Now, the following action is the part of the plot where the story begins to slow down and work towards the end. And the last part is the resolution, or the denouement. This is the part that resolves issues, thus concluding the story. It's a very simple graph. It is more or less like as a pyramid, so you can really just easily remember this one. Okay? The theme is the main idea the author wants to convey to the readers. In simpler terms, the theme is a statement about the topic. For example, this one, life is beautiful. It can also be just one word, love, faith, romance, happiness, sadness. And of course, it can also be a sentence. I believe this is the perfect quote that would best exemplify the story. According to Rabindranath Tagore, faith is a bird that feels the light and sings when the dawn is still dark. The story, aside from being a relationship between the father and son, also talks about faith, the different types of faith depending on the outlook of a person. So our story is Faith, Love Time, and Dr. Lazaro. It is a story about a relationship between a father and his son. The author of this story is Gregorio Brillantes. Gregorio Brillantes is a multi-awarded fictionist and essayist who comes from Tarlac. His most anthologized short stories include Distance to Andromeda and Faith, Love Time, and Dr. Lazaro. We don't have a lot of characters in the story, but let's go ahead with our main character, Dr. Lazaro. He is the main protagonist of the story and is an old doctor whose faith has long been detached due to circumstances that happened in his personal and professional life. You'll know further on about this story, but I want to really highlight this character. Dr. Lazaro is a person who has seen death and problems arise being a doctor, and that really shook his faith. On the other hand, we have his wife, Mrs. Lazaro, who is the wife of the protagonist and a devout believer of religion, and due to circumstances that happened in her life. She is the exact opposite of her husband, where in fact she was very attached or very close to religion and her beliefs. We have Ben Lazaro, who is the son of the protagonist, and his father wanted him to pursue a different profession, but he had already made plans for his own path. And of course, we have Pedro Esteban, who is the father of the victim, who called Dr. Lazaro for an emergency. The setting or the location of the story is in a rural town. The scene happened late at night in a small house owned by Pedro Esteban. You'll know further on the moment that you actually read the story. Now, the issues or life situations. This is the central theme, and this is also the conflict. So, the story aims to talk about one's faith and how it affects relationships with his family. Circumstances have affected one's faith. This story also talks about the relationship between a parent and child and how their plans for the future differ from each other. However, one fateful night changed the relationship between father and son. Now, the point of view in this story is a third person omniscient character. This person does not belong to the plot nor the story, but is actually telling the story, around. The major themes are about faith, family, and personal choices. Again, it's very important to highlight this when people start to question their faith, their belief in the higher being. Have there been moments in your life when you started to question your faith? I'm sure, maybe not a lot, but I'm sure we've had those moments where we actually struggled with something, where we actually sometimes ask, why me? Of all people, have I done something wrong? And in those moments, you start to lose your faith. Or you might be like the wife of Dr. Lazaro, who believes that these moments were actually something that would bring her closer to what she believed in. So there have been so many times like that, and I would like to talk about that more once we are done with the story. Now, after you have read the story, I want you to write in the comments after this post. So you've watched the video, and I want you to come back here and then comment on this. Again, I'd not grade on the length of the answer. I mostly grade on the content of your answer. So you need not make your answers long. You just make sure to give a lot of content in your answer. So two answers, two paragraphs, please put numbers before them. The first one is, what advice can you give Ben Lazaro on following his dreams? This is something very important. I'm not sure if you've had that or if you've had those moments where your guardian, your parents, your family, or anybody dictate to you on what you should do, what's quote unquote best for you. But you already have your own plans and you want to be your own individual. So do that. What advice can you give Ben Lazaro on following his dreams? And of course, number two, what advice can you give Dr. Lazaro on raising his child and on his outlook in life? So it's your chance to talk to the parent on how he should take care of his child. So these answers are 10 points each. The grading is subjective. It depends on creativity and originality. For those who just copy their responses, you will not be given any score. All right? So I will be looking further or waiting for your answers in the comments below. Thank you and God bless you.